Jack was an ordinary student who loved exploring abandoned places. One day, he heard about an old psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town. It was once notorious for its brutal treatment methods, and many said that the ghosts of the patients still haunted its halls. Jack, with his thirst for adrenaline, decided to check out the place at night. He made his way through overgrown bushes to the old building, abandoned and forgotten by everyone. With a flashlight in hand, he cautiously entered. The corridors were covered in dust, the walls were peeling, and the floors creaked underfoot. As he walked past empty wards, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Suddenly, he heard a rustle. Turning around, he saw a shadow flicker around the corner. His heart beat faster, but curiosity got the better of him. Jack followed the shadow down a dark corridor. With each step, a more sinister chill surrounded him. At the end of the corridor, he saw a door that was slightly ajar. Jack pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was empty except for an old mirror on the wall. The flashlight beam reflected in the mirror, and Jack saw his reflection and something else behind him. He turned sharply, but there was no one there. His heart skipped a beat. He looked back into the mirror. Now there was a figure staring right at him. The figure was a woman in a white coat, with empty eye sockets and a ghastly grin. She slowly raised her hand and pointed at Jack. At that moment, the flashlight began to flicker, and the figure started to approach. Jack dashed to the exit, but the door slammed shut in his face. Struggling to open it, he felt cold fingers on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw the ghost was already close. Jack screamed, but the sound of his scream faded into the walls of the abandoned hospital. The next morning, Jack's friends found his car near the abandoned building. They called the police, and a search began, but Jack was never found. The only thing left of him was a strange message on his phone, recorded that night. In the recording, his shaky voice could be heard. "They are here. They never left. I see them." Since then, no one has dared to visit that abandoned hospital, fearing that the ghosts are still there, searching for a new victim. Once upon a time, in a small town lost in dense forests, lived a girl named Emma. She had just moved into an old house that she inherited from her long-deceased aunt. The house stood on the edge of the forest, and there were dark rumors about it. People said that strange sounds and whispers could be heard in the house at night. On the first night, Emma had a hard time falling asleep, but soon she was awakened by a quiet, almost indistinguishable whisper. She got out of bed, trembling with fear, and followed the sound down the dark hallway. It led her to an old mirror hanging on the wall in the living room. Emma looked at her reflection and suddenly thought she saw something moving behind her. She turned around, but no one was there. Deciding it was just her imagination, Emma went back to bed, but she couldn't sleep for a long time, listening to every rustle. The next night, the same thing happened. The whisper woke her up again, and this time it was more insistent, as if calling her by name. Emma went down to the living room and saw that the mirror was fogged up, as if someone had breathed on it. And on the fogged surface, words were written, "Don't leave." Emma. Frightened, she wiped the mirror and went back to her bedroom, but the feeling of fear didn't go away. Over the next few nights, the situation worsened. The whisper grew louder, and more messages appeared on the mirror. "I am here, help me, don't leave me." One day, Emma couldn't take it anymore and decided to find out what was happening. She explored the house and found an old diary of her aunt, which told the tragic story of a girl named Anna who had lived in the house many years ago. Anna drowned in the well, which was now filled in, but her soul seemed not to have found peace. Emma realized she had to help Anna. That very night, she went to the old well and began digging it out. When the well was almost cleared, she felt something cold grab her hand and pull her down. Emma screamed, but there was no one around to hear her. The next morning, neighbors found the house empty, and Emma had vanished without a trace. No one ever found out what happened to her. But they say if you walk past that house at night, you can hear a whisper calling the new owner's name. Emma had always dreamed of adventures and new places, so when she got a job as a caretaker at an old, abandoned lighthouse on the coast of New England, she eagerly accepted the offer. The lighthouse stood on a rocky shore, surrounded by crashing waves and a dark forest. Local residents avoid. On her first night, as Emma explored her new home, she stumbled upon an old diary hidden in a drawer. The name on the cover read Laura. Emma began reading the diary and learned that Laura had been the previous lighthouse keeper, who disappeared many years ago. The last entry in the diary read, "Something in this lighthouse haunts me. I hear its whispers at night, calling me by name. I must find out what's happening." Emma set the diary aside, thinking it was just old superstitions. But that night, she woke up feeling like someone was watching her. In the darkness, she saw the silhouette of a woman standing by the window. Emma jumped out of bed, but the figure disappeared. Her heart raced, but she tried to calm herself, dismissing it as a trick of light and shadow. The situation worsened the next night. Emma woke up again to whispers. She left her room and found that the light in the lighthouse was on, though she was sure she had turned it off before bed. Climbing upstairs, she discovered that the lamp was indeed lit, and around it were old sea charts and journals, as if someone had been studying them recently. Her attention was drawn to a strange sound coming from outside. Approaching the window, Emma saw the figure of a woman standing at the base of the lighthouse below. She stared directly at Emma, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. Emma heard her voice in her head, "Help me." Desperate for answers, Emma decided to investigate further. She returned to Laura's diary and found mention of an underground tunnel beneath the lighthouse that led to an old dungeon. Armed with a flashlight, Emma set out to find the entrance to the tunnel. Beneath the lighthouse, she discovered a hidden door leading downward. Descending a creaky staircase, she found herself in a cold, damp dungeon. In the corner, she spotted an old chest. When she opened it, she found a skeleton and remnants of clothing that matched Laura's description from the diary. Suddenly, the door behind her slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. Her flashlight flickered and went out, leaving her in pitch darkness. In that moment, she felt cold breath on her neck and heard a whisper, "You're next." Emma screamed, but her cry was swallowed by silence. The next morning, local residents noticed that the lighthouse light was still on, but there was no answer to their calls. They found the lighthouse empty, and Emma had vanished without a trace. Only Laura's diary lay open on the table, with a new entry on the last page: "She came for me." Since then, every new lighthouse keeper has disappeared after a few nights. And each time, a new entry appears in the diary, warning the next victim. John and Sarah sat by the campfire, resting after a long day of exploration. They were archaeologists, and this time their adventure had brought them to a remote mountain range where, according to rumors, there was an ancient cave filled with treasures. "Sarah, are you sure this is the place?" John asked, peering at the map. "Yes," Sarah replied, trying to warm her hands by the fire. "According to the legend, there are untold riches hidden here, but they are cursed." The next day, they continued their journey deeper into the cave. Soon they found what they were looking for: a massive chamber adorned with ancient inscriptions and drawings. In the center lay a skeleton, surrounded by gold and silver artifacts. "Look," Sarah pointed to the skeleton. "These must be the remains of someone who tried to take the treasures." John approached the skeleton and noticed strange markings on its bones. It seems he died an unnatural death. Maybe the legend of the curse is true. But greed got the better of John, and he began collecting the treasures. Sarah tried to stop him, but it was too late. As soon as John lifted the largest gold artifact, the ground beneath them shook, and the walls of the cave began to collapse. They ran towards the exit, but the cave seemed endless. Suddenly, a spirit of an ancient warrior, whose remains they had disturbed, appeared before them. "You have disturbed the peace of my burial," the spirit thundered. "Now you too will remain here forever." Sarah screamed and grabbed John's hand, trying to pull him out of the cave, but the spirit was too strong. At the last moment, when it seemed they wouldn't escape, the spirit suddenly vanished, and they found themselves at the cave's entrance. They ran outside and looked back. The entrance to the cave was blocked by rocks, and it seemed it would never open again. "We barely made it," John said, trembling from the experience. "I will never touch cursed treasures again." Sarah silently nodded, and they began their journey back, vowing never to return to that place. Edward and Elizabeth were longtime friends who were always seeking adventures. This time, their path led them to an old, abandoned castle deep in the forest, surrounded by eerie rumors. "Elizabeth, are you sure we should go in there?" Edward asked, standing before the massive iron gates. "Yes," Elizabeth replied, smiling broadly. "They say a ghost lives here, guarding an ancient secret." They pushed open the creaking gates and entered the castle courtyard. Ancient statues covered in moss stood around, and inside the castle, there was silence. The walls were draped in cobwebs, and the floors creaked beneath their feet. "Look," Elizabeth whispered, pointing to an old portrait on the wall. "That must be him, the ghost." Edward stepped closer and saw a portrait of an old man with piercing eyes. Suddenly, the candles in the room lit up by themselves, and the portrait came to life. "Who dares enter my castle?" boomed a voice from the portrait. Elizabeth stepped forward. "We're just explorers, seeking adventure and mysteries." "You shouldn't have come here," the voice replied. "Now you will learn my story." The portrait began to tell the tale of how the castle once belonged to a powerful lord who died under mysterious circumstances. His spirit was trapped here forever, guarding an ancient artifact. "You must leave before it's too late," the ghost warned. But Edward and Elizabeth decided to stay and solve the mystery. They followed the clues found in the castle and soon found themselves in a dungeon where an ancient chest lay. "This must be it," Edward said, opening the chest. Inside was an ancient amulet, glowing with magical light. Suddenly, the dungeon walls began to close in, and the ghost appeared before them. "You found my artifact, but now you must leave it here and go," he commanded. Understanding the danger, Elizabeth grabbed the amulet and threw it back into the chest. At that moment, the dungeon stopped collapsing, and the Lord's Spirit thanked them, disappearing. They ran out of the castle, and looking back, saw it slowly vanish into the night. "We did it," Edward said, hugging Elizabeth. "We solved the mystery and freed the spirit." Elizabeth smiled, and they walked back, leaving behind the forest castle that had now disappeared from this world forever. John and Catherine were siblings who loved exploring old, abandoned places. One evening, they stumbled upon an ancient mansion in the heart of Blackwood Forest. The locals called it the Haunted Mansion and warned them not to go near it, but their curiosity got the better of them. "Are you sure about this?" Emily James asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. Catherine grinned, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Of course, John. Think of the adventure." As they approached the mansion, the air grew colder. The grand doors creaked open with a groan that echoed through the trees. They stepped inside, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The mansion was a labyrinth of dark corridors and dusty rooms. Old portraits of stern-faced individuals lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow the siblings as they moved. Suddenly they heard a soft whispering, but couldn't make out the words. "Did you hear that?" John whispered, his grip tightening on his flashlight. Catherine nodded, her smile fading. "Let's keep going. We can't turn back now." They followed the whispers to a grand staircase, its once luxurious carpet now worn and threadbare. As they ascended, the whispers grew louder, leading them to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and they pushed it open to reveal a bedroom frozen in time. In the center of the room stood a woman in a tattered gown, her back to them. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and she whispered softly to herself. "John, this isn't funny," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "It's not me," John replied, stepping back. The whispers turned into anguished cries, and the room grew colder. The chandelier began to sway, and the portraits on the walls seemed to glare at them with increasing intensity. "We need to get out of here," John shouted, grabbing Catherine's hand. As they turned to leave, the door slammed shut. The cries grew louder, almost deafening. The siblings ran to the window, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the piano. It was a ghostly woman in a long, tattered dress. Her eyes were hollow, and she reached out towards them, her mouth moving as if she were trying to speak. "Help me." "Please," the ghostly woman whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. Catherine stepped forward, her fear momentarily forgotten. "What do you want?" The ghost pointed to a portrait on the wall, a man with cruel eyes and a menacing smile. He trapped me here. Free me." John and Catherine exchanged a glance, understanding what they had to do. They grabbed a nearby candlestick and smashed the portrait. As the glass shattered, the cries ceased, and the ghostly woman smiled, fading away into the night. The door creaked open, and the siblings rushed out, not stopping until they were far from the mansion. They never spoke of that night again, but they could never forget the haunted mansion of Blackwood Forest and the sorrowful spirit they had freed. Anthony and Maria were best friends with a shared passion for urban legends and supernatural tales. One evening, they decided to investigate the infamous Grimwood Station, an old, abandoned railway station on the outskirts of their town. Rumors had it that a ghost train appeared there every night at midnight, carrying the souls of those who had mysteriously disappeared over the years. "Are you ready for this?" Maria Anthony asked, trying to sound braver than he felt. Maria nodded, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "I've been ready since the day we heard about this place. Let's see if the legends are true." They reached Grimwood Station just before midnight. The station was eerily quiet, with overgrown weeds and crumbling structures adding to its haunted appearance. The old clock tower, long broken, struck 12 with a resonant chime that sent shivers down their spines. "Do you hear that?" Maria whispered, pointing to the tracks. Anthony strained his ears and heard a faint, rhythmic clatter in the distance. It grew louder and louder until an ancient, steam-powered train emerged from the darkness, its ghostly form shimmering under the moonlight. The train screeched to a halt at the platform, its doors opening with a creak. Fog poured out, and the temperature dropped sharply. Anthony and Maria exchanged a nervous glance but stepped onto the platform, drawn by an inexplicable force. Inside the train, the atmosphere was even more chilling. The seats were occupied by spectral passengers, their faces devoid of any emotion. The conductor, a tall figure in an old-fashioned uniform, approached them. "Tickets, please," he intoned, his voice echoing through the empty carriage. "We don't have tickets," Anthony stammered, taking a step back. The conductor's eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "All passengers must have a ticket." Maria, thinking quickly, pulled out an old postcard from her pocket. "Is this enough?" The conductor inspected it, then nodded. "Welcome aboard." The train began to move, and the fog outside thickened, obscuring everything. The passengers remained silent, their eyes fixed on Anthony and Maria. Suddenly the train jolted, and they were thrown into another carriage. This carriage was different. It was filled with photographs and personal items of the people who had vanished. Maria picked up a photo of a young boy, her fingers trembling. "This This is David. He disappeared last year." Anthony found a diary, its pages filled with desperate entries from someone named Emily. She was looking for her brother ... and then she disappeared too. Realization dawned on them. The ghost train was a collection of lost souls, people who had been searching for others and had become trapped themselves. "We need to get out of here," Maria Anthony urged, grabbing her hand. They ran back to the first carriage, but the doors were locked. The conductor reappeared, blocking their way. No one leaves the train without completing their journey. Desperation fueled their actions. Anthony spotted an emergency brake and pulled it with all his might. The train screeched to a halt, and the fog began to recede. The spectral passengers faded away, and the conductor's form wavered. "You've disrupted the balance," he growled, but his voice was weakening. The train vanished, leaving Anthony and Maria standing on the empty platform of Grimwood Station. The old clock struck 1, and the night was silent once more. They never spoke of what happened that night, but they knew they had narrowly escaped becoming part of the ghost train's tragic collection. From then on, They vowed to respect the boundaries between the living and the dead and never to seek out the supernatural again. Alexander and Sophia were adventurous friends who loved exploring new places. One day they heard about a mysterious forest called Whispering Pines, which was said to be enchanted and filled with eerie whispers at night. Intrigued, they decided to visit and see if the legends were true. "Are you sure about this?" Emily James asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. Sophia nodded, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Of course, Alexander. This will be the adventure of a lifetime." As they entered Whispering Pines, the sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting strange shadows on the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of pine and moss, and an unsettling silence surrounded them. "Do you hear that?" Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander strained his ears and heard faint whispers carried by the wind. They seemed to be calling their names, luring them deeper into the forest. Following the whispers, they came upon an old, overgrown path that led to a hidden clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone well, covered in ivy and surrounded by glowing mushrooms. "Wow, this place is amazing," Sophia said, stepping closer to the well. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, and the ground around the well began to tremble. A ghostly figure emerged from the well, a woman with flowing hair and a long, tattered dress. Her eyes were hollow, and she raised a translucent hand towards them. "Help me. Find my lost pendant," the ghostly woman pleaded, her voice echoing through the clearing. Alexander and Sophia exchanged a glance, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. "Where is it?" Alexander asked. The ghost pointed towards the darkest part of the forest. "It was taken by the forest spirits. Return it to me, and I will grant you safe passage." Determined to help, Alexander and Sophia ventured into the heart of Whispering Pines. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as they navigated through the dense undergrowth. Finally, they reached an ancient oak tree with gnarled roots and branches that seemed to move on their own. Hanging from a low branch was a pendant, glowing faintly in the dim light. Sophia reached out to grab it, but the tree's branches came to life, trying to ensnare her. "Hold on," Sophia, Alexander shouted, grabbing a fallen branch and using it to fend off the living tree. With a swift motion, Sophia snatched the pendant, and the tree's branches retreated. They hurried back to the clearing, where the ghostly woman waited. "Here we found your pendant," Sophia said, handing it over. The ghostly woman's form solidified, and she smiled gratefully. "Thank you. You have freed me from my curse. The forest spirits will no longer harm you." With that, she vanished, and the whispers ceased. The forest seemed to come alive with a sense of peace and tranquility. Alexander and Sophia left Whispering Pines, forever changed by their encounter with the supernatural. They never forgot the enchanted forest and the ghostly woman they had helped, and from then on, they respected the mystical forces that existed beyond their understanding. Michael and Catherine were friends who were passionate about exploring mysterious places. One day they heard a legend about the Phantom Lake, surrounded by thick fog, where it was said that a spirit lived, punishing those who dared to disturb its peace. Deciding to check the veracity of the legend, they went there late in the evening. "Are you sure you want to go there, Catherine?" Michael asked, feeling his heart begin to beat faster as they approached a lake hidden in the fog. Catherine nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Of course, Michael. We have to find out if this is true or just a rumor." They entered the forest surrounding the lake, and a thick fog immediately enveloped them. The steps became quieter, absorbed by the humid air. Suddenly, they heard the faint sound of crying coming from the depths of the forest. "Did you hear that?" Catherine whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. Michael nodded and suggested moving more carefully. They headed towards the sound and soon saw an old, dilapidated hut at the very shore of the lake. Crying could be heard from inside. As they got closer, the door of the hut slowly opened and a woman in a white dress with long flowing hair came out. Her eyes were full of pain and despair. "Who you are?" Michael dared to ask. "I am the spirit of this lake," she answered, her voice quiet but filled with grief. "I am waiting for the return of my lost child. Help me, and I will no longer bother the living." Catherine stepped forward. "How can we help you?" The spirit pointed to an old cradle standing in the corner of the hut. "Find his doll. She fell into the lake the day he disappeared. Give it back to me." Michael and Catherine went to the lake shore. The water was dark and impenetrable. They searched for a long time until Michael felt something solid under his feet. He dove in and pulled out an old, moldy doll. "We found her," Michael said when they returned to the hut. The spirit took the doll with trepidation and gratitude. "Thank you. Now I can go into peace." With these words, she slowly disappeared into the air, and the fog began to dissipate. The lake became calm and quiet, as if it had never known grief. Michael and Catherine left the forest feeling relieved and proud that they had helped the spirit find peace. They never forgot the Phantom Lake and promised each other to respect forces that are beyond human understanding. Jack and Lisa were avid adventurers, always seeking out new and unexplored terrains. One summer, they decided to embark on a journey through the vast and treacherous expanse of the Mojave Desert. Stories of eerie occurrences and phantom sightings intrigued them, especially the legend of the Phantom of the Desert, a ghostly figure said to haunt the dunes. "Are you ready for this?" Lisa Jack asked, as they packed their gear into their Jeep. Lisa smiled confidently. "Absolutely, Jack. Let's uncover the truth behind these legends." The sun blazed fiercely as they drove deeper into the desert. The air shimmered with heat, and the landscape was a barren sea of sand and rock. As dusk approached, they decided to set up camp near an ancient, dried-up oasis. As the night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. They sat by the campfire, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows around them. The silence of the desert was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional howl of a distant coyote. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered suddenly, her eyes wide with fear. Jack listened intently. There it was again, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper carried by the wind. It sounded like a mournful wail, growing louder and closer with each passing second. "Let's check it out," Jack said, grabbing a flashlight. Lisa nodded, clutching her own flashlight tightly. They ventured out into the darkness, the cold sand crunching under their feet. The whispering grew louder, transforming into distinct words that chilled them to the bone. "Leave this place, or face the same fate." The voice seemed to come from all around them, echoing off the dunes. They shone their flashlights in every direction but saw nothing. Suddenly, a shadowy figure materialized in front of them, a ghostly apparition of a man, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The phantom raised a skeletal hand and pointed towards the horizon. "I was once a traveler like you, lost in this unforgiving desert. I died here, alone and desperate. Now, I am cursed to wander these sands for eternity." Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. "How can we help you?" The ghost's eyes seemed to glow with a flicker of hope. "There is a map buried beneath the ancient tree near the oasis. It will lead you to my resting place. Bury my remains and I will finally find peace." Determined to help the restless spirit, Jack and Lisa hurried back to the oasis. They found the ancient tree, its gnarled branches stretching towards the sky. Digging at its base, they uncovered a weathered map. Following its directions, they navigated through the desert until they found a shallow grave, marked by a pile of stones. They carefully gathered the bones and buried them beneath the tree, saying a prayer for the lost soul. As they finished, a gentle breeze swept through the desert, carrying away the oppressive heat and filling the air with a sense of calm. "Thank you," the phantom's voice whispered one last time before fading into the night. Jack and Lisa returned to their camp, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and reverence for the desert and its mysteries. They left the Mojave Desert the next day, forever changed by their encounter with the supernatural and determined to respect the power of the unknown.